Hey guys, today I want to talk about how you can successfully naturalize and become a US citizen during Trump's second term. So it was no surprise last time he was president that he put up a bunch of roadblocks to make it more difficult to become a US citizen. They engaged in things like extreme background vetting, which currently is also still pretty extreme, but it was more extreme when Trump was president. They would do more background checks and try to look for other ways to deny a naturalization application. And given all of these added background checks, it actually ended up slowing down the process pretty substantially. By the time Trump left office, there was a massive backlog of pending naturalization applications, and the processing times in some jurisdictions had increased to up to 24 months from the day you file your citizenship application. Whereas today, on the day this video is released, the average processing time is like 5 to 6 months from start to finish in most of the United States. So a lot of this video is predicated on the things Trump did last time around, because I think history is a good predictor of what he's going to do this time around, and I actually think he's going to try to take it even further, but that's speculation. So a couple of the things he did was find ways to deny applications by finding that your good moral character was in question. One of the requirements for naturalization is that you demonstrate 3 or 5 years of good moral character before you submit your application, depending on which category you're applying for citizenship under. If you're married to a US citizen and applying based on that category, it's 3 years of good character. But for most other applicants, and generally speaking, it's 5 years of good character. Now, one of the ways that they found that you didn't have good character is if you failed to timely update a change of address form. So if you failed to tell USCIS within 10 days of changing your address, some USCIS officers used that to deny your naturalization application. Another thing that happened the last time around is that they added a bunch of questions to the civics and history test. And they made it so that instead of having to get 6 out of 10 questions right, you have to get 12 out of 20 questions right. And there was a larger pool of questions from them to pull from. Another change that they made to try to reduce the number of people who would apply is nearly double the cost of naturalization. Actually, they implemented a very broad fee schedule change. Last time Trump was president, it ended up getting reversed by a court because it was not properly implemented. But if history repeats itself, I would expect some similar fee increases this time around. Another common thing that we saw the last time Trump was president was USCIS officers asking about crimes, even minor things that took place outside of the 5-year good moral character window. So typically, if you're convicted of any offenses, even something minor like disorderly conduct, but it took place within the last 5 years, that's fair game for the USCIS officer to inquire further, to ask for documents. Generally speaking, if you've been convicted of any crimes, including something minor such as disorderly conduct, within the last 5 years, that's totally fair game. The immigration officer can ask you questions about that, ask you what happened, ask you to submit documentation to show what the outcome of that case was. But last time Trump was president, USCIS officers would commonly ask about stuff that happened outside of the last 5 years, and they would sometimes try to show that you have a history of misconduct, and they would try to use something that happened outside of the last 5 years to show that your good moral character during the last 5 years is in question. It was also quite common during Trump's last presidency for USCIS officers to ask more questions about your tax returns. So currently, the N-400, the citizenship application, asks you, have you ever not filed a tax return since you became a permanent resident? And if you answer yes to that, you basically just have to explain why. Like, for example, I wasn't earning any income for these 2 years and I wasn't required to file a tax return, so I didn't file a tax return. Or I was a student and not working during those years. That's fine. But during Trump's last presidency, immigration officers would ask more questions. Currently, You only really have to get into it with them if you owe any back taxes. Because another question is, do you ever owe any overdue taxes? So if you ever received a letter saying you're delinquent or you owe money, you would generally have to answer yes to that. And that was another easy way for immigration officers to deny citizenship applications. So what would I do differently this time around? A couple things. Number one, I would file your N-400 application as soon as possible if you're eligible and don't have any other issues. This isn't blanket legal advice. Speak to an immigration lawyer. You could schedule a consultation directly with me if you want to talk about it to see if it's a good idea to file. But the reason I would rather you file sooner, if you're eligible today and you're deciding should I file today or a year from now, I would rather see you do it today because it can take some time for any regulations or changes to take place. Those can take months or longer. So current processing times are pretty fast, 5 to 6 months in most of the United States, and you might get in before those processing times begin to pretty dramatically increase. And you might also get in before there's any regulations that change that make the process more complicated. I will add one interesting point. The number of N-400 applications that got denied before Trump and during Trump remained pretty constant. It was something around like 90 to 92% were approved. So despite all of these changes that were implemented to make it more difficult to get naturalized, the number of approved applications, the percentage that were approved, actually remained pretty constant. But there was a massive backlog by the time Trump left his presidency. So I want to see people get in before that backlog begins to accumulate and extreme vetting and longer processing background checks go into effect. So what else would I do during Trump's presidency to increase the chances of getting your naturalization application approved? One of the things is I would definitely not leave the United States for more than 6 months continuously. You can make some arguments if you leave for more than 6 months that you maintained your residency in the US and you might still qualify for citizenship without breaking your continuous presence. But the chances of you making those arguments successfully after Trump implements new policies, if they mimic the policies from his last presidency, are very low. So if you depart the US for more than 6 months, you'll break your continuous presence and you basically have to start those 5 years over again. It's not exactly 5 years, it's actually closer to 4.5 years, but you would have to start that timeline over again and possibly wait a few more years before you can apply for citizenship. Another thing, very obvious, is avoid getting convicted of crimes because even minor things can affect your ability to demonstrate good moral character, especially if they took place during the last 5 years. So if you're convicted of any crimes, it might be a good idea to speak with an immigration lawyer before you submit your application to see if it would be a waste of money or not. And the final thing would be don't owe any overdue taxes before you submit your application. Get all your tax documents in order, get copies of your tax returns from the last few years. If you owe any taxes, fix that and get a letter saying that you don't owe any overdue taxes and that you're completely paid up before you submit your application. Interesting note here, if you are on a payment plan with the IRS and you are in compliance with the payment plan, that's good enough. You don't need to be fully paid up. But if you're on a monthly payment plan and you've been making the payments, bring evidence of the payment plan to your interview and bring evidence that you've actually submitted the payments, which could be like bank statements or some other evidence that you physically made the payments. All right, guys, so that brings us to the end of the video. I think the most important thing that I would tell most people, if you're eligible and your case is clean, you have no criminal history, no significant departures from the United States, good with your taxes, is I would rather you submit your application sooner than later. If you need any assistance or you want to consult with me directly, please feel free to schedule a consultation. I do represent people in the entire United States. And if you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe. I put out videos on family-based immigration, especially marriage-based green cards, and naturalization on a regular basis. And I'll see you guys next time for another one.